didn't all start here. We didn't all, and for the newcomers, we didn't all come from the same places. So the endeavor here and the goal here is different for different groups of people. So I think you could consider the Earth like America in that if you go back only a few hundred years, nobody came from here except, we could say, perhaps the Native American peoples. But everybody else, they came from Denmark, or they came from Ireland, or they came from England, or they came from wherever. And they came from Asia and the Africas and so on. And so it is with the Earth. The population, 7 billion of them, they didn't all come from here, in my view. And the more you look at it, the more self-evident that is. And so not everybody's trajectory is the same. So to say, let's have unitary consciousness, let's wake up ready for the calendar day, is very self-indulgent, really, because everybody's adventure is rather unique. And if your adventure is to grow, then grow. But nobody's going to come in and give you that, because that disenfranchises you from your own growth. So if you look at it in that way, you can't really lose. And if something phenomenally wonderful happens, fantastic. And if it doesn't, fantastic, because the adventure is pretty engrossing anyway, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, what you're saying makes complete sense to me. I mean, I think that we all come from different places in this universe with different perspectives and so on and so forth. So when we come here, you know, we're all having different experiences. I mean, and they're as unique as the amount of people on this planet. But when we see, for example, systems disintegrating or under great upheaval, and people really tied into that third-dimensional reality, what do you suppose that's going to do for humanity?
Well, one of the marvelous things about this place that we find ourselves in is that it has a kind of emergency threshold reboot system, I like to call it. And every now and again, the whole place kind of like shifts, and it does it on an energy level. And it's the most fundamental level. The actual structure itself shifts. And a scientist would say perhaps at the, at the molecular level. And a spiritual person would say, the vibrations change, frequencies change. And a cultural person would say, well, it's the vibe has changed, or the zeitgeist has changed. But no matter which angle you look at it from, we can kind of feel that something is changing at the moment. Something is happening, and it's a little bit uncomfortable because we've all been really brought up with the idea that 1950s Britain and 1950s America is an idyllic kind of way of life where everything is lovely and plentiful and abundant, and the government loves you and looks after you, and you can leave your front door open and all your friends and family are all very happy, and everyone gets along with each other and bakes pies and drives shiny cars around.
Mm-hmm.
And that is still driving most people's dreams today. Of course, the particulars of that have changed. It's now a different kind of house, a different kind of car, and different kinds of clothes. But people really are still just interested in having nice things, quite frankly. And that is like very poor, quite frankly. Very poor indeed. And it's a little bit like everybody's been in the first few classes of college, and they keep failing to graduate, they keep failing to pass their exams to get to the next level of education. And what the Earth does, it seems to me anyway, having studied this and looked at it over the last perceptible 10,000 years and speculatively the last 25,000 years, is that every now and again it kind of reboots itself. And that means that all those investments in what is essentially illusory, of course, which are just thought forms, mind projections, all those thought form investments are disintegrated, basically. And there's a very close relationship with that reboot process and the sun. And at a physical level, you could say, well, yes, we can clearly see how huge coronal mass ejection could come and, be a bit of a game changer, change the way that things work on Earth on a physical level. But if you look at it at a slightly different perspective and say, well, let's imagine for a minute that the sun is a living entity in exactly the same way as the Earth is. And let's say that what we have been taught to believe is a big fireball kind of nuclear power station engine thing, big yellow sphere, is actually not. It's not that at all. It's actually an entity. It's a living entity. And that light is consciousness. Then as it changes its consciousness and as it changes its relationship with the Earth and as it fires what we perceive as, this electromagnetic radiation, let's imagine that that isn't that it's actually something more primal in a way. It's actually consciousness. The whole ecosystem of our solar system is fundamentally changing. All the planets are changing. Physically, there's a lot of evidence for that in terms of how they're changing the structures and heating up and so on and so forth. But at a metaphysical level, and at, as I say, a more core level, the structure itself is changing. And if you can really get still, and whoever you are and whatever practice you have for that, if you can just kind of switch down the static of the mind, you can actually detect that the physical world is becoming less dense. Mm-hmm. Its glue is starting to break down. And that is an absolutely wonderful thing in my view. And it's a very, very perfectly organic, natural development. And of course, if you said that in the wrong company, in mainstream downtown LA or New York or Portland, where I am, mm-hmm. people are going to think you're bonkers. And if you say that loud enough, somebody is going to come and put you in a little room and lock the door. So you have to be careful about how you talk about this. So very often in interviews and conversations I have, you talk about these symptoms and the effects of that in terms of people are beginning to disbelieve the political paradigm anymore. Even the old-timers who have always voted Democrat or Republican are starting to think, hang on a second, this is all hogwash, isn't it? This isn't really doing anything. And even the most pristine, wonderful human being who might find themselves in D.C. in the corridors of power isn't really going to make any difference. It doesn't work like that. And of course, the big question is, well, if we don't have that political apparatus, what the hell do we have? What's the alternative? Is it just little people living in eco-villages and governing themselves? Is it chaos? Is it wonderful? Is it good? Is it bad? And again, people are looking at, well, what that would look like as a result of the state of consciousness. And so you have to go to the state of consciousness to imagine how that would be. And at the moment, the state of consciousness in all major world population centers is extremely low. Is it extremely low vibration? Let's just put it as diplomatically as we can without judging there. It's a very low vibration, and I think nobody could deny that really. Even those who admit that would have to look around and say, well, I know what you mean. Mm-hmm. And so what the Earth does is it says, well, that's okay, but now everyone operating on that vibratory level is basically going to be brought to the next phase of the game, and that looks like you're being kind of energetically recycled, basically. And if you look at it from a purely physical level, it is like a cataclysm or an apocalypse or some sort of rapture, depending on who you are and what your way of perceiving the world is. It looks like some tremendous, huge, profound drama. And it is if you're a little human being, if you're a little leaf on the tree and all you've ever known is summer and then autumn comes and you find your colours are changing and then you fall off the bloody tree and land on the ground and then get blown around by the wind, that is quite a dramatic thing if you've never seen a seasonal change before.
That's right.
But if you step back from that and say, well, if I get out of my third density egoic projection for a minute, as wonderful and beautiful and natural as that is, but I am a multi